is going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mikasa Sukaz. And of course, as always, I'm your humble host, Niko House. Today I have with me a very special guest to talk about this Ukraine, Russia, U.S. conflict and give us a unique perspective. She is an RT contributor, and for all you Rokfin folks out there, she is also a Rokfin creator now. So everybody welcome Rachel Blevins to the Rokfin family. Thanks for joining the show, Rachel. How you doing?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing good. Just kind of following that news coverage and interested to see rather what unfolds between the US, Russia, and Ukraine. I know that's kind of the big topic of the moment.
Yeah, now a lot of people would say, well, this isn't new. Russia and Ukraine have had issues for a while. The US, obviously, in relation to Russia, has had issues for a while. And the US attempting to commit regime change in the Ukraine has been happening over and over. It did happen at least recently in 2014. What can you explain what's happening right now and why this situation is unique compared to situations in the past?
Yeah, so this situation really started unfolding over the last few months. I know you probably saw a lot of different media reports coming out, all of a sudden warning that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. Now, every single time that this happened, Russia would respond and they would say, well, wait a second, we're not planning that at all. Essentially, where are you getting your information? And yet, U.S. officials within the Biden administration continued with this sort of narrative. And that's when Russia came back and said, okay, well, let's start having some meetings. We saw, a few different summits between Biden and Putin. We even saw talks today between Blinken and Lavrov. And so you definitely do have that dialogue between the two sides. And it's interesting because for their part, Russia has come to this and they have actually been the ones to present a security pact to say, hey, let's make a deal here. You guys seem to think we're going to invade Ukraine. We say that we're not. Let's present some kind of deal to where we guarantee you that that won't happen. But then at the same time, we also have to guarantee that each of these countries promise that they will not have certain weapons within a certain distance of each other's borders. So it really is one of those cases where Russia's kind of coming to the table and acting like an adult about this, while at the same time, the United States is taking their, draft agreement as a way to say, well, you're trying to control NATO. That was their response. At the same time, we also
That's the most
know
gaslighting, man. Look, the United States is like a toxic boyfriend or girlfriend, right? It's like, yeah, man, you're just trying to control me. It's like, didn't you just say you were scared we were going to invade? And we're saying, hey, let's do a guarantee to make sure that nobody gets invaded.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah,
oh, man,
exactly.
you're just trying to control me, man. I just want to be
Well,
free.
and it's interesting. Yes. And it's interesting because, you talk about these issues between Russia and Ukraine, and then at the same time, you have the U.S. getting involved, meddling its way into these issues with influence, also with $2.5 billion in military aid since 2014. So it's funny how the U.S. kind of tries to act like, oh, we're just trying to facilitate peace in this area. That's why we're sending billions of dollars in weapons and support to this country so that they can go right up along Russia's border. I mean, it is kind of, and then at the same time, you also have the media coverage of all of this going right along with what the United States is saying and really kind of beating those war drums saying, well, the United States is saying that Russia is going to invade, so that must mean that they're going to invade.
Yeah, right. It's weird because at least in my lifetime, it hasn't been Russia who will randomly invade another country or commit a regime change. Generally, it's been the United States. Now, Russia, like most countries, have preferential allies that they would like to see in power. But the way the United States goes about its business compared to how Russia goes about its business, I mean, it makes Russia look like a bunch of damn pacifists at that point, at least between maybe 2000 and now, right? But what we see is constant projection from the U.S., right? We're the ones who already committed a regime change in the Ukraine in 2014. We did it already. And they're like, oh man, what happens if Russia did the exact same thing we already did?
Yeah,
it's weird.
Yeah, and especially when you have CNN sitting there, they put out that article last week warning that there's going to be some sort of false flag operation. Well, who is
CNN
the pro when it comes to, CNN put out this article and
Conspiracy News Network.
They of course those gold anonymous sources from the U.S. intelligence community, as they always do, because they never really want to back up those claims. Instead, they just say, well, the intelligence sources told us this, and then that's really all they have to say, because they know that at least the segment of their audience that they are trying to reach will believe them, because there's some sort of fear attached. So they put out this article, they say, hey, there's going to be a false flag operation. Well, they're completely ignoring the fact that not only have there been a few...
That's what CNN has told me.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's funny because not only are they using that term now all of a sudden, but even Press Secretary Jen Psaki used that term during a White House press conference when she echoed the same claims and literally said, yeah, we're hearing from our sources that there's going to be a false flag attack in Ukraine and that Russia's planning it out right now. I mean, you know, I'm crazy. Like, oh, I thought,
how did you know that?
False flags didn't exist.
Like, if there was really a false flag operation that was being planned in Ukraine, the U.S. would, like, jump on Russia immediately. Like, I mean, let's be honest, right? It's the U.S. Like, y'all are the kings of false flag operations, so I guess y'all would know if there was one being planned. But let's just say the anonymous tips from from U.S. intelligence agencies involving Russia have been shit. Russiagate was entirely based on an anonymous tip from two random agents that no one heard of and were never named nor ever held accountable for being so egregiously wrong and sending our media and politics in general into a tailspin for years. Why? Like, if you or I, Rachel, made these ridiculous claims about the maneuvers or potential maneuvers of another nation and said, well, you know, you just gotta trust us. Anonymous tip, bro.
Right.
What would the media say about us?
Yeah, exactly. And can you imagine if RT was reporting that? I mean, of course, anything that RT does, CNN looks at with the most critical lens. They're waiting for. I mean, can you imagine if we came on air and said, "Oh yeah, we know that this is going to happen. We have some anonymous sources." All of a sudden, they would take issue with anonymous sources after literally relying on those anonymous intelligence community members for the last, 6 years at this point and trying to suss Russiagate and not backing down in any possible way. And I also think it's important to note that when you look at this situation and you look at it from Russia's perspective, we also have to remember the geography here, which is that this is a country where these troops are lining up along their border. I mean, whenever CNN and Fox News cover it, they always love to talk about how Russia has troops on Ukraine's border. Well, actually, Russia has troops on its own border. Yeah. And what they're doing is they're sitting there and they're watching NATO ramp up its support for a country that is along their border. Of course, they're going to speak out against that. And then at the same time, there comes the fact that, you've got the United States and its NATO allies sitting there saying, hey, Russia's going to invade. It's going to happen. Do you really think that Russia is going to choose this time right now to invade and do exactly what NATO wants them to do when they know that NATO is just chomping at the bit for some sort of conflict?
Yeah. I mean, despite popular opinion in the United States, highly celebrated, well-recognized world leaders like Assad or Putin is not going to just randomly start attacking people and do exactly what would be the opposite of maintaining peace. I know that little the quote-unquote false flag, the literal false flag that happened with the chemical weapons attack got people convinced that world leaders who've maintained power in the midst of a Western empire are idiots. That just do stuff to provoke NATO forces, but that's not the case. And it's bizarre too, because I'm glad you brought up the fact that Russia has troops on its own border. So, for example, if Rachel or I went to Texas and countered the National Guard and was like, it looks like the United States is reinforcing its troops on Mexico's border, we would sound like idiots. They're like, duh. I mean, it's their border.
Right. Absolutely.
There. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And you also have to take into account, I mean, let's say that hypothetically this situation was reversed and we had Russia pouring $2.5 billion worth of weapons and support into Canada. Do you think that the United States would just stand by and be like, I don't know, those Russian-funded Canadian troops are lining up on our border. We're not going to speak out about it. We're not going to criticize it. And if we do criticize it, then it's us telling Russia what to do, which is what the United States is literally accusing Russia of right now. I mean, there's no logic to it. It's all just based on fear, on making people scared that there's going to be some sort of conflict break out, and they automatically think, well, Ukraine is our ally, we have to stand up for them. And they don't realize the fact that they've been listening to these politicians talk and maybe not paying attention to what they're saying. But Ukrainian President Zelensky has said over the last year that he expects at some point that Crimea and that the Donbass region are going to come back under Ukrainian rule. That is his plan. So if we're talking about false flag attacks, there, yes, should be some sort of focus on those
Crimea,
claims. However,
hold on, double back real quick. Didn't Crimea vote to be part of Russia?
Yep.
So what's the
exactly? And
wasn't like a 98% or something like that? Like vote tally, like literally 98% were in favor of joining Russia.
Yep. But so if you ask the Ukrainian government,
how are you this? I mean, I know Zelensky's kind of folded, for lack of a better word. He's folded under Western pressure. He's not getting any help. And I honestly kind of feel bad for the guy. I think he bit off way more than he could chew. But what all of a sudden makes you bold enough to think that you're going to be able to get a country back or a area back under your control that wants nothing to do with you, unless you're not speaking for you, you're speaking for the people who are fomenting discord in your region, which would be the United States and the Western powers?
Oh, exactly. And that's what's so, interesting about it, is the fact that you can have an entire region of people who want to be a part of Russia, but if you ask the Ukrainian government, their response to that is to say, oh, that's just the product of so-called Russian aggression. That's Russia's forcing them to be that way.
They're forcing them to want to be a part of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, okay, well, only here in the United States, where a number of people don't pay attention to geopolitics and to what is actually going on, can you sell a narrative like that to where Americans look and say, oh, well, the United States needs to get involved? Because that's always the way that they do it. They always say, well, the United States needs to get involved to really help out the civilian people, make sure that they have our support, because that's what they want and what they need. And yet, if you pay attention to our foreign policy, that's literally never what happens.
Yeah, things always get progressively worse. I mean, we can take a look in Africa, for example. Anybody want to tell me how Libya is looking right now? Anybody? There's still slavery, still open market slavery. We supposedly entered Libya and took out Gaddafi for humanitarian reasons, but in actuality, we just destabilized the region because that was really always the goal. If you even look at the USSR being balkanized by the claim is that the spark was started by the intelligentsia. But if you actually look at the unredacted files from the CIA, turns out as we do now, we got a bunch of celebrities and academics to lie. And we admitted we were lying about Stalin, like we lied about Gaddafi, and we separated that region to destabilize it because destabilized regions are easier to control. And that's what it comes down to. So we never go anywhere to help anybody. We go there to ensure that no one's helping. That's what we're really there for, to make sure they're not getting help.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so frustrating to watch how, we are 20 years into this. You look back at this so-called war on terrorism. You look at the fact that a lie like weapons of mass destruction was sold to the American people by the media. They were the ones who were joining in and beating the war drums and saying we should invade Iraq. 20 years after that, have we not learned a single lesson? It's always, I think, the most frustrating part of really covering these stories is watching how easily the public forgets the lessons of the past, watching how easily they forget WMDs or so-called chemical weapons attacks in Syria. It's as if it does not exist in the minds of so many people, because every time we have some sort of new plot or some sort of new warning come out, they automatically attach themselves to that and act as if it's true, when time, as we've been seeing here in this country, the trust in mainstream media continues to be at a new all-time low. It feels like every single year. So my question always becomes, if you don't trust those mainstream media talking heads, then why are you still listening to them and still giving them the time of day and believing what they are telling you? The
majority of people don't care about what's going on. Like, if we're being honest, like when it comes to foreign policy, they don't care about what's happening with Russia and the Ukraine. They just don't care. And that's an unfortunate reality. Then you have people like you or I that has any reasonable level of just distrust in the mainstream media, no matter what the issue is. Like if they tell me one thing and they repeat it multiple times that day, I'm immediately believing it's the opposite until otherwise proven. But then you have people who have been loyal to the mainstream media, the ones that vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Bush or whoever they vote for next without questioning it. The ones who are okay with third parties being smashed, the ones who are okay with election integrity being the most important issue, but simultaneously being ignored. Like knowing that our election has gotten so, like every party accuses the other party of committing election fraud. And then whenever it's time to talk about it, everybody pretends it doesn't exist. Right. And the story gets told, like the lie gets touted loudly, right? But the retractions are always quiet. They're always quiet. We were wrong, we messed up, Russiagate isn't real, the chemical weapons attack never happened. You know, those white helmets that was getting all those cool awards and getting celebrated by pop culture, they're actually terrorists. You know, stuff like that gets said real quietly. So I can understand, and with the way that the media kind of constantly inundates us with new stories and new catastrophes that we have to look out for, and new villains from that are literally thousands of miles away from us, like it's hard to keep up for a lot of people who aren't actively paying attention, like choosing to, and are just kind of like casually watching CNN every day because they think that they can trust them. But in actuality, they're counting on you to only casually watch rather than verifying their claims.
Yeah, it definitely is the way that it has played out. And I think it, a lot of it comes back to sort of that two-party system, that left-right paradigm that we all seem to be forced into. And for so many people, they think, we saw this play out in the 2020 election. They sat there and they said, anybody who's not Donald Trump is great, right? I will vote for anyone if it's not Donald Trump. If it gets him and his annoying tweets out of my newsfeed, out of my CNN coverage, whatever it may be. And then they don't pay attention to all of the places where Trump's policy was the same as Obama's and now Biden's policies are the same as Trump's, and how that cycle keeps continuing. Instead, they just look at it from the us versus them mindset, instead of paying attention to the fact that, you look at Congress, you look at how many people have been in Congress for decades. They now look like they're 105 years old, and yet they're making decisions on policies that they don't even fully understand. Like, it just is crazy to wrap your mind around the fact that whenever we're coming up to literally a presidential election, your top two candidates are people who not only in their 70s, but are people like Donald Trump and like Joe Biden, and yet those are the best that America has to offer.
Back to back, they were the oldest. They were the oldest presidents in history, right? Back to back, like that's absurd, people. That's insane, and it's the duopoly is a big problem, and the Machiavellian tactics, like you remember the Ukraine Gate scandal, the impeachment, and how Donald Trump was being impeached. Everybody thought it was because he bullied Zelensky, which actually wasn't the case. Zelensky initially reached out to him to investigate people from the Obama administration. And they were like, man, nah, Trump, what he actually did was call and threaten to remove aid if they didn't do what he wanted. But I'm like, hold up. Now, I know I didn't just see a video of Biden literally doing this. And braggadociously so at that. And what was wild was the timing, right? The impeachment timing versus the timing of Joe Biden entering the race. And then being able to say, oh, if he says it's about me, it's only because we're running against each other.
Yeah.
It's like, but in videos.
Exactly. Yeah. And what's so crazy to me is they will freak out over a single phone call, yet we're not talking about impeachment proceedings because Trump saw, under his administration, saw civilian casualties skyrocket in Afghanistan. I mean, we're not talking about impeachment proceedings for really any of these presidents because they're illegally bombing other countries. Yeah, exactly.
Launching airstrikes in Syria without an investigation turned out to be under false pretense. Like, so many reasons.
You would think that if it were... Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just saying, there's so many reasons. There's so many reasons we could have impeached him, but they chose the reason that was really, it was all about protecting Biden and all those Atlantic Council affiliates that were involved in that Burisma scandal. But The funniest part about that entire impeachment to me, like, I didn't want to hear any debate because I'm like, oh, that's crazy, man. They're so confident that this happened, right? Why didn't they just call Zelensky to the stand? Just call him. Have him speak in front of the country so he'll tell you, confirm. Yeah, man, but they don't need to do that. No. Yeah. This whole impeachment is based off of the fact that he supposedly got bullied by Trump when he came out and admitted that never happened. But this is what we're dealing with. This is the media. The media doesn't even. People don't even ask that question.
Doesn't it?
Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to see kind of that media coverage and how it has played out because Joe Biden really got this soft talking media coverage of him for his first year in office. They talked about how great and wonderful he was. And really, some of the only criticism we've seen has started out with that press conference he gave just a few days ago when all of a sudden you had news outlets suddenly getting on to Biden. And the reason that they were doing it was because he basically came out and admitted that, look, if Russia follows through on this claim of a quote unquote false flag attack like we say they are, the United States is not going to rush into World War III. That's basically what he was admitting. For the average person, it's like, yeah, that's kind of common sense. But for the media, they were freaking out over it. And I'm like, how bizarre is that to live in a country where our mainstream media is so focused on war that the only time they like a president like Trump, the only time they think that he's presidential is when he's bombing Syria or, when he's being tough on Russia and their wars.
They said but that then when it comes to someone like Biden,
yeah, exactly. And they wanted more from him. And now when it comes to Biden, it's like the times when they criticize him is when he's not running towards World War III as if that's something that the United States should be getting into now.
And remember, it won't be their kids fighting in these wars. It won't be them fighting. It'll be us. And it does scare you because you do have to wonder if part of the reason that you're seeing this so I don't know if you've noticed this pattern in history, at least the last 100 years. Right before every major war, there is a massive economic downturn that forces people to join the military, even before the draft is initiated. And they basically build up the support as MOSs, because a lot of people, when they do volunteer, that's what they go for, is to support MOSs. And then whenever things hit full-scale war, America and their warmongers start making money, they start the draft, and that's where they get their infantry people. And think about it. It happened before World War One. It happened. The UK specifically was having an issue with their economy in the early 1900s. It happened right before World War II. Everybody remembers that, the Great Depression. This is a pattern now. And we are seeing, the GDP might say one thing or whatever. The stock market might even say one thing. But income inequality is trash. There are more homeless people than there have ever been in the history of the country. The poverty draft is real. I am a victim of it. That's why I was in the military. And when you see the escalation, because it's not just here. People don't even know. You know how many units are being deployed to Africa on a regular basis? Not special forces anymore, ground troops. 2nd BCT from Fort Bragg, 525, my old unit, 525 Battlefield Surveillance Brigade, they deployed there. We're escalating for something big, and it's being done behind closed doors. And we should be a little bit more worried about it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, especially when you've got Congress, saying that they're winding down the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, that they're pulling back in Syria, whatever it may be. And then they turn right around and they pass a $700 billion plus defense budget. Maybe people should start taking a step back and wondering, yeah, exactly. Why are you passing such a big defense budget when you're supposed to be pulling back on these wars? And, when you talk about the economy, we're in a situation right now where inflation is near 40-year highs. It is insane to see the fact that Americans are paying more for everything all around. And a big part of that has been fueled by the Federal Reserve, by our own central bank. They have spent the last 2 years pumping cheap money into our economy so that, for the first year, we're all sitting there going, hey, I got a stimulus check. I got $1,200 extra dollars. This is great. I can get through, these unprecedented lockdowns. Well, now 2 years later, when people, stop getting those stimulus checks, stop paying attention to the fact that the central bank has been in this continued spiral for the last 2 years. And then all of a sudden they start wondering why everything's so much more expensive. I mean, a lot of this is manufactured. It is federal policy. They know exactly what they're doing. Yeah. And then they sit there and they act like, oh, no, we don't. But like even Janet Yellen said this week that she was shocked by the fact that the economy was struggling in the way that it was, that she was surprised. And at the same time, we had, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell spent the last year saying that inflation would be transitory, that it wasn't going to be around for long. And what you have right now is every single central bank, every major central bank around the world is now kind of having to admit that, look, our forecasts for inflation not only are higher than we said that they would be just a few months ago, but they're going to continue to get higher in 2022.
Isn't it always higher?
And it's, yeah, exactly. And it's the average person. It's those low-income individuals who end up paying the price for that, because those increased costs get offset to all of the consumers who were already just trying to get by. Now they're having to spend more money there. Well, at the same time, the wealthy continue to get even wealthier, as we've seen throughout the pandemic.
That's facts. And the supply, I mean, I'm not surprised, that they're like, they can't believe what's happening. I mean, hell, I figured everything's going well, considering that Mayor Pete, who literally has complete control over his child birth situation, decided to take paternity leave in the middle of the worst supply chain issue in history. And it's literally his job to fix it. Like, they're acting, it's truly bizarre. Like, it's like Black Mirror-esque to watch Biden or Psaki or like all these other politicians look at you dead in the face every day in some way, for a fact, like, everything's cool, man. We're good. Everything's better.
Yeah.
We're fine. It's better than Trump.
Yeah.
I'm like,
and
bro,
you know what? You know why they're saying that everything's fine? And you know why they're saying that everything's fine? Because the stock market is hitting record high after record high. Well, it didn't this week, but for the last year, we have seen it hit one record after another. So what they're telling you is, look, all of our wealthy friends are doing just fine. Therefore, everything is fine.
As if you needed another reason to realize that the stock market is complete and total bullshit based on fairy tales and unicorns. Because people weren't spending money. But somehow everybody's stocks are going up because they're literally getting money from these bills like the CARES Act, and then they're buying back their own stocks. And like, then the stocks plummet because there's actually no money going into it because the middle class is a damn near non-existent at this point. And inflation has gotten it so that basically your savings account doesn't matter anymore, right? That's the saddest part. I think a lot of people have like 401k and all that shit. Like, they're the ones, people in that 55 to 65 range. It's got to be a terrifying time if you're not wealthy or like, because the quickest way, the people that were hurt the most were the upper middle class. They got decimated. Like, those unemployment checks aren't enough when you have a family and you're used to having two incomes making a certain amount. Like, every state had a different cap on their income. Then if you made a certain amount prior to the pandemic, they were using that to factor into what check you got for your family. Right? If you had savings and stocks. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you think of all of the businesses, too, that were forced to close down over the last 2 years. And yeah, the government will say, hey, here's this handout. But we also know that that system for business loans was incredibly corrupt. And there were a number of major corporations that were getting money from it when it was supposed to go to those smaller businesses. A number of those small businesses were told that they didn't even qualify for those loans. And, you think of the United States, this is supposed to be a country built on the middle class, built on business owners. And it should be way more concerning to people that we have watched companies like Amazon just explode over the last 2 years. I mean, you want to know who's hiring right now? Amazon is hiring. They've been hiring throughout the entire pandemic, while all of those smaller companies were forced to shut down and to let go of their employees.
Yeah, they never stopped hiring. In fact, they've built these little weird pop-up shops in New York that I saw. Like, don't go to New York. I wouldn't suggest it. It sucks right now. But yeah, it's a little bit weird, right? I mean, I always say, like, Jeff Bezos and not just him, but the like, it's wild how the richest man in the world can be a failed businessman who literally survived off of government subsidies. That's why Amazon's successful. Like there is no indication that this country is a meritocracy. I mean, you got one billionaire.
Yeah, that should tell you everything you need to know right there.
Yeah, the Tesla was a failed project. It was so expensive and so inefficient that the government basically kept him alive with subsidies, and he got his seeding money from his parents because he was like an ivory don or some shit like that. And you got on the other side Bezos, who's now I guess the second. I know him and Bezos are going back and forth, but Bezos became the richest man in the world with a failed business plan. Like, that's where we're at right now. Biden was a segregationist, a racist, 94 crime bill, Telecommunications Act 96, author of the Patriot Act, author of, one of the architects of the Iraq War, failed, sexual assault after sexual assault after sexual assault after sexual assault after sexual assault, failed all the way into the presidency with dementia. And we're like, damn, I don't understand. Why is everything so bad right now?
Yeah.
Bro, you're not allowed to talk about it.
Hey, he's not Donald Trump.
Right? Yeah, right, exactly. He's not Donald Trump, I guess. Like, why don't you like Donald Trump? Well, he's racist and a sex pest and he's a warmonger. Oh, so why do you like Joe Biden? Well, so it's different, right? Because he's not Donald Trump and he's a Democrat. So, and the fact that you can't have these conversations in a meaningful and genuine way without it becoming some disingenuous, like, argument, because, like, you're having a conversation based off of facts in reality, but other people want to have conversations that are based in either opinion, partisan politics, or they're even just purposely being disingenuous because they're clout chasing. And that's what it comes like. They're trying to sell a product, and you being honest hurts their product. And that's why our country keeps spiraling out of control, because we can't have a simple conversation. Like, we have a segregationist president, people. That's what happened. Mm-hmm. And he looked at you and said, yeah, man, so I like black people now. Oh, well, let me just listen to some more things he has to say. Turns out, not true. Okay. What did he say about that dude? Were you smoking crack, man? Did they ask you to do a drug test for some crack?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it brings you back to the fact that, you think of someone like Kamala Harris. When she tried to run for president, everyone hated her because they knew that she was a cop and they pointed to her past. And then all of a sudden it was like the Democratic Party decided that she was going to be the vice president because they knew that that was the only possible way that they were going to get her into the White House. And all of a sudden people started turning around and they were like, look, she's a woman. She's a woman of color. It's historic. We have to be in favor of her because she's not Donald Trump, or I guess Mike Pence in that case.
Yeah, and it's literally the two candidates that were attacked the most, got exposed the most during the debates. Somehow, and it's just really indicative of how things really work in this country. They said they wanted Kamala Harris in the White House. At some point, there was a decision made that they wanted Joe Biden in the White House. With the Kamala Harris thing, they met in the Hamptons in 2017, literally anointed her. And we did not, at least in the primaries, support them. I can go into all kinds of details about election integrity, but at the end of the day, the majority of people did not support them. The people who were being supported weren't allowed to debate to the same degree that the establishment candidates were able to debate. The list goes on. And somehow, despite even the Democratic Party candidates knew how weak Biden was on the issues because they spent so much time attacking him. And somehow they end up in power anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And it brings you back to the fact that we are not allowed to have third parties in this country. And I say that because, it's from everything from the way that these debates are handled to the way the media coverage is that, we have not seen that support really pop off over the last few years. And I thought, when we were in 2016, and it was Donald Trump to Hillary Clinton, and they were the two most unfavorable, unlike candidates of all time, it was still insane to me that it was like, okay, we don't have any good third-party challengers who really were able to gain steam against these people.
So what was interesting about that, and this is how corrupt the system is. So Jill Stein, and the Green Party at the time, broke records for fundraising and for votes. And then Jill Stein went to challenge the elections in certain states because Hillary was making these bold claims that Trump cheated, remember? And so Jill was like, okay, I'll take your bluff. I'm a sue. And all of a sudden, Hillary went to a little cocoon like, oh shit, hold up, don't do that. Don't do that. Because then what they were finding is that a lot of the voting machines weren't reconcilable. In other words, they couldn't figure out who voted for who in the most important swing states. I think Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and it was turning out that more and more votes were turning up for the Green Party, which goes back to the reality, which is those who run the district count the votes at the end of the day. I don't give a damn what you might think, but this is reality. And when you can't have automatic audits, we don't know who's voting for who. I don't give a damn what you like. I know people, it's hard for people to accept. I'm not trying to tell you I know what's going on. What I am telling you is none of us know what's going on, and we can't verify what's going on, and that's the problem. And that's what leads to a Donald Trump and then a Joe Biden right after. That's what leads to third parties not being recognized, good candidates getting ignored and never really having a chance to win. That's what leads to people getting discouraged with the political process. And then what, maybe 4 or 5 years later or 8 years later, turning around, getting falsely inspired again by another fake candidate. And we begin the cycle all over again. We don't have that many cycles, rotations left in the cycle for this world. I hope people realize that. This Ukraine-Russia conflict is a big deal. Russia, I mean, Putin's made it pretty clear. He's tired of our bullshit. He said it would be a really good idea for them to not put any ships on the Black Sea, if I'm not mistaken. That's what he said. That's a threat, guys.
And we've also watched the U.S. increase its presence along the Black Sea. We've watched them increase their flyovers. I mean, to think of, yes, we here in the United States, we know it is no secret that we spend more on our defense budget than like the next 9 countries combined. But what we watched the U.S. do in recent years under Trump and now under Biden is to increase its military presence surrounding Russia and surrounding China. And I always wonder, because of course the U.S. neoconservatives, whatever you want to call them, when they defend it, they say, oh, these are freedom of navigation exercises. We should be allowed to do that. We allowed to, send our military ships and our military planes right around their borders as close as we can get so that we have some close calls, and it may be a little scary for a moment, but hey, that is our right to do that. But then you bring in the question of, well, is that the smartest thing to do? Because how do you think a country like Russia looks at that when they are watching the U.S. increase its military presence, increase its military support for countries right on their border? They are going to see that as a threat to their country, and the United States should know that, because if they were in the same position, they would be doing the same thing. And it brings us back to the fact that we are seeing this happen, not just Democrats, Republicans, it's all the same. I mean, we continue to see this provocation happen. And I think it's important to remember that we would be in this situation even if Trump was in office. I would argue it doesn't matter who the person in the presidential office is. It matters the fact that we continue in this direction. We continue in this exact same foreign policy, and it continues to get support from both political parties.
Yep. And to be fair too, the U.S. doesn't even have to be in this position. We'll just pretend we're in this type of position just to start some shit with somebody. Like, we literally do that. We're the kings and queens of gaslighting in this country. It's bizarre. Like I said, it's like literally we're the abusive ex-husband who will beat you and say, now, why you made me have to do that, man? Why you made me do that? Because if you would have just listened to me, well, you were asking me to jump off of a bridge. Okay, I don't know what the problem is. Are you loyal? Like, that's what we do to people, man. I agree 100% with everything you just said. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on. And everybody, you can watch Rachel on RT, but also she is on Rokfin as well. Rachel Blevins, make sure to go find her there. Where else can they find you at, Rachel?
You can also follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/RachelBlevins, Instagram under the same nickname. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been a lot of fun.
Of course. So with that being said, legitimate, thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mi Casa Es Su Casa. Don't forget to like this video, share this video, leave a comment below, but always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.